should be to honor the settler's true intent whenever possible, even if imperfectly expressed.
That seems more fair somehow.
It arguably prioritizes intent over strict formality. So when you're analyzing a problem on an exam, it's often wise to discuss both the traditional common law rule and this modern trend, then apply the modern rule in your analysis, noting that the outcome might differ in different jurisdictions.
That's incredibly helpful advice. Discuss both, apply modern. Got it. So that covers express trust. What about trusts that aren't for private individuals, but for the greater good of the community?
You're talking about charitable trusts. To be considered charitable, a trust must meet two key requirements. First, it must have a stated charitable purpose.
Like helping the poor, education, religion.
Precisely. Relieving poverty, advancing education or religion, promoting good health, governmental purposes, or any other purpose benefiting the community broadly. Second, it must exist for the benefit of the community at large, or for a varying class of persons, not just a specific identifiable individual or a closed group.
So the poor people of this city is okay, but my poor relatives is not.
That's the classic distinction, yes. My poor relatives benefits a defined, non-varying class, so it's generally considered a private trust.
Okay. What are the unique advantages of charitable trusts? I imagine they're treated differently if they're for the public good. They must have broader implications than just individual beneficiaries, right?
They certainly are treated differently. One major advantage, a powerful incentive for philanthropy, is that charitable trusts are not subject to the rule against perpetuities.
Oh, the rule against perpetuity is the bane of law students everywhere.
It's a light chuckle, indeed. But charitable trusts get a pass. This means they can, in theory, continue indefinitely, serving their purpose across centuries.
Why the exception?
It makes perfect sense, given their public benefit. This exception allows them to fulfill their long-term objectives without fear of being struck down due to remote vesting. It ensures that good works can persist for generations.
That's a huge deal. And what if the original charitable purpose becomes impossible or obsolete over time? Like the disease it was meant to cure gets cured. Does the trust just fail and the money go back to the settler's estate?
Not necessarily. This is where the Cypress doctrine comes in.
Cypre. Sounds French.
It is meaning as near as possible.
Right.
And it's a testament to the law's desire to preserve charitable intent. If a charitable trust's original purpose becomes illegal, impracticable, or impossible to perform, like your example of the cured disease, or maybe a trust for a specific school that closes down,
Right.
without Cypress, that money would just sit there or revert. This doctrine allows a court to modify the trust to further an alternative charitable purpose that is as close as possible or as near as possible to the settler's original, broader charitable intent.
So the court tries to find the next best thing.
Exactly. It's the law's way of saying philanthropy should adapt, not die. It ensures the settler's spirit of giving continues, even if the original target vanishes. It's important to remember to apply the Cypress doctrine before applying a resulting trust in such a situation, as the law prefers to preserve the charitable nature.
Good tip. Apply Cypress first.
Yeah.
Are there any other oddball trusts?
Well, we also have a small, interesting carve-out called an honorary trust.
Honorary.
Yeah. These are legally enforceable trusts that are not created for charitable purposes and have no definite human beneficiaries. They're usually created for things like caring for pets.
A trust for Fido.
Exactly. Or maintaining a specific monument or burial plot. Because there's no human beneficiary to enforce them, they rely on the trustee's willingness and ability, but courts will generally enforce them within a reasonable time frame if the trustee accepts.
Fascinating. Okay. So we've talked about express trusts, those created by clear intent. But what about trusts that a court imposes, not because someone intended to create one in the usual way, but as a remedy for some wrong or an oversight? These aren't created by intent like the express trust, right? These are imposed by a court.
Exactly. These are remedial trusts, often referred to as constructive or resulting trusts, and they are purely equitable remedies created by operation of law.
Equitable remedies, meaning?
Meaning they are not subject to the usual trust creation requirements we just covered. They don't need intent ascertainable beneficiaries in the same way, nor do they need to comply with the statute of wills or the statute of frauds.
So they're like legal tools the court uses.
Precisely. Their sole purpose, and thus the trustee's only duty, is to convey the trust property to the rightful beneficiary to prevent injustice. Once that duty is fulfilled, the remedial trust terminates. They are temporary remedial structures.
So they're like temporary placeholders or legal tools designed to correct a wrong or rectify an oversight. What are the main types?
The first is a resulting trust. A court may create a resulting trust when an express trust fails for some reason. Perhaps the purpose becomes impossible, or the beneficiaries cannot be ascertained, or when there's an incomplete disposition of trust property.
Like that semi-secret trust example.
Exactly. Its core purpose is to prevent unjust enrichment by requiring the holder of the property, often the nominal trustee, to return it to the settlor, or if the settlor is deceased, to the settlor's estate. It essentially presumes that the settlor would want their property back if the trust they created couldn't fully function as intended.
So, if Eleanor sets up a trust for a specific purpose, and that purpose utterly fails or is never fulfilled, the property doesn't just stay with Sterling Bank and Trust, it goes back to Eleanor or her estate.
That's precisely the idea. The second, and perhaps more commonly known type, is a constructive trust.
Constructive sounds like it's constructed by the court.
That's a good way to think of it. This type of trust is imposed by a court when it concludes that the person holding legal title to the property, if allowed to keep it, would profit unjustly by a wrong. Crucially, some form of wrongful conduct is almost always required here.
Wrongful conduct? Like
Yeah.
what?
This often involves situations like fraud, undue influence, a breach of fiduciary duty, or even theft. The court steps in to rectify the injustice, compelling the wrongdoer to hold the property as if they were a trustee for the true owner.
So a constructive trust is a direct response to some kind of foul play or legal wrongdoing to prevent someone from benefiting from their own bad acts. Is there anything that might prevent a court from imposing one of these equitable remedies? Like if the trust document planned for failure?
Yes, some trusts include a gift-over clause.
Gift over.
Yeah, it's a specific provision that stipulates how the trust property should be disposed of if the trust's primary purpose fails or cannot be achieved. Many jurisdictions will honor such a clause before resorting to imposing an equitable remedy like a resulting or constructive trust.
So the settler's plan B takes priority.
Exactly. It essentially respects the settler's foresight and their plan B, demonstrating the law's deference to the settler's expressed intent wherever possible.
Okay, now that we know the types of trusts and how they're created, let's talk about the people at the heart of it, the beneficiaries, and how their financial interests, and maybe more importantly, those of their creditors, are handled. This is where things get really practical, isn't it? Especially for anyone looking at managing their own assets or understanding how they might receive them. It's about how much control a beneficiary truly has over their stake.
You're right. Understanding the beneficiary's rights and limitations is absolutely vital. Generally, a beneficiary's equitable interest in trust property is freely transferable.
Freely transferable so they can sell it.
Yes. This means they can sell, gift, or assign their interest to someone else, unless that right is specifically limited by a statute or, more commonly, by a specific provision within the trust instrument itself.
So, if Eleanor's grandson, Liam, is set to receive income from the Sterling Family Trust, he could, in theory, sell his right to that future income to someone else, unless the trust explicitly says he can't.
That's the default rule, yes. However, here's a crucial point. Once the trust property is actually distributed to the beneficiary and is in their hands,
Once they have the cash.
right, any attempts by the trust to restrain its transferability after it's been received are generally invalid. Also, a beneficiary's creditors can typically reach trust principal or income only when those amounts become payable to the beneficiary or are subject to their immediate demand.
Only when it's due to be paid out.
Exactly. So while the money is still managed within the trust and not yet due to the beneficiary, it's generally protected from their creditors.
Yep.
It's like waiting for your paycheck. Your creditors can't usually garnish your wages directly from your employer before payday. They have to wait until it's actually in your bank account or payable to you.
That makes perfect sense. But there are specific types of trusts designed precisely to protect beneficiaries from their own spending habits or from the reach of creditors, right? I've heard of these being called beneficiary protections.
Exactly. These are strategic tools settlers can use. First, let's look at a support trust.
Support trust, okay.
This type of trust directs the trustee to pay income or principal only as necessary to support the beneficiary. This generally includes maintaining the lifestyle to which the beneficiary is accustomed.
Their standard of living.
Right, reflecting their prior standard of living.
Mm-hmm.
The key here is the as necessary clause. It's not an entitlement to a fixed sum, but rather a flexible payment based on needs.
And does that protect it from creditors?
Generally, yes. Creditors cannot reach the assets of a support trust precisely because the payments are tied to the beneficiary's needs, not their general financial obligations. However, there's a key exception.
Always an exception.
Always. A creditor who provided necessities to the beneficiary, things like food, shelter, critical medical care, can often be paid directly by the trustee, even from a support trust, on public policy grounds.
That feels like a very sensible public policy exception.
Yeah.
You can't use a trust to avoid paying for life's essentials. Okay. What's the practical difference between a mandatory and a discretionary trust? I imagine the trustee's power is vastly different in each.
It's a fundamental difference, yeah. It affects how much power the trustee has and consequently how much access a beneficiary or their creditors have to the trust assets. In a mandatory trust, the trustee has no discretion whatsoever regarding payments.
None.
None. The trust instrument mandates specific payments at specific times. For example, the Sterling Family Trust might state, Sterling Bank and Trust shall pay $5,000 to Sarah Sterling on the first day of every month.
Shall pay. Very clear.
It's very clear. In such a trust, because the payments are guaranteed, the beneficiary's creditors generally have the same rights as the beneficiary to those payments. They can attach them when they become due, as the trustee has no choice but to make them.
Okay, so mandatory means creditors can usually get it.
Yeah.
What about discretionary?
In stark contrast, a discretionary trust gives the trustee complete discretion regarding such payments. The trustee may pay income or principal, but is not compelled to.
May pay versus shall pay.
Exactly. For example, Sterling Bank and Trust may, in its sole discretion, pay income or principal to Liam Sterling as it deems appropriate for his general welfare. As a result, the beneficiary of a fully discretionary trust generally cannot challenge the trustee's actions absent a clear abuse of discretion.
So the beneficiary can't force the trustee to pay.
Generally, no. If the trustee chooses to exercise their discretion and make a payment, then the beneficiary's creditors can reach those funds once they are paid. But if the trustee does not exercise their discretion to pay, then the beneficiary's interest generally cannot be reached by creditors because the beneficiary has no absolute right to demand payment.
That sounds like much stronger protection.
It's a powerful asset protection tool, yeah, precisely because it keeps the assets outside the beneficiary's direct control.
Can you give us a clear example to truly differentiate those and make it stick? Because it sounds like discretionary trusts offer a lot more protection, but maybe at a cost to the beneficiary's certainty.
Certainly. Let's use our Sterling Family Trust for Eleanor's grandchildren again. Imagine she wants to provide for Sarah and Liam. For Sarah, she sets up a mandatory trust that says, Sterling Bank and Trust shall distribute $50,000 to Sarah on January 1st of each year until she turns 30.
Okay, Sarah knows what she's getting.
Right. Sarah's creditors know that $50,000 is coming every January 1st, and they can likely claim it when it becomes due. Sarah has an absolute right to that money.
Okay.
Now, for Liam, who Eleanor worries might be a bit impulsive with money,
Oh, Leo.
she sets up a discretionary trust that says, Sterling Bank and Trust may distribute to Liam such amounts of principal or income as the trustee, in its sole discretion, deems advisable for Liam's general welfare. Here, Liam has no guarantee of any payment.
None at all.
Nope. If Liam has a creditor, that creditor cannot demand Sterling Bank and Trust pay them because Liam himself cannot demand payment. The bank has the absolute power to decide whether to pay Liam, and thus whether any funds become available to Liam's creditors.
Wow. That's a huge difference.
It offers a much higher level of asset protection, primarily by keeping the assets out of Liam's direct control and subject solely to the trustee's judgment.
That's incredibly clear. So discretionary gives the trustee all the power, which protects the beneficiary from their creditors at the cost of the beneficiary being able to demand anything. What about a spendthrift trust? That sounds like it's designed to protect someone who, well, tends to spend quite a lot.
You've definitely got the right idea. A spendthrift trust is designed specifically to protect a beneficiary from their own financial imprudence, or more commonly, from their creditors.
Okay, how does it work?
It explicitly restricts the beneficiary's power to voluntarily or involuntarily transfer their equitable interest in the trust. This restriction is crucial.
So they can't sell their interest and creditors can't seize it.
Generally, yes, but it applies only while the property remains in the trust. Once the property has been paid out to the beneficiary, the spendthrift protection vanishes.
Ah, only while it's in the trust.
Correct. So generally speaking, creditors usually cannot reach a beneficiary's trust interest if the governing instrument includes a spendthrift clause. This can be a huge relief for a settler concerned about a beneficiary with poor financial judgment, like Eleanor might be for Liam.
That sounds like an incredibly powerful shield. But are there any limits to a spendthrift trust's protection? I'm guessing there must be some exceptions for broader public policy reasons, right? The shields can't be absolute.
You're very perceptive, and this is a key point for your studies. While powerful, spendthrift trusts are not absolute shields. There are key exceptions, and these are very important for any legal exam because they represent situations where societal obligations or specific legal claims override the settler's protective intent.
Okay, what are they?
1. Children and spouses entitled to support. Public policy dictates that beneficiaries cannot use a spendthrift trust to avoid their legal obligations to support their minor children or former spouses. A court can often compel the trustee to make payments for support.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Can't hide from child support.
Exactly. 2. Holders of federal or state tax liens. The government can still reach trust assets to satisfy legitimate tax obligations. Uncle Sam usually gets paid.
Right. Taxes are unavoidable.
And 3, in some jurisdictions, providers of necessaries. Similar to the support trust exception, those who provide essential goods or services, like critical health care or basic shelter, to the beneficiary may be able to reach spendthrift trust assets to ensure basic needs are met.
So support, taxes, and maybe necessary.
Those are the big ones. These exceptions exist because the law recognizes that certain fundamental societal obligations and governmental functions outweigh the settler's desire to protect the beneficiary's interest from all claims. It's a delicate balance between private intent and the broader public good.
Okay. This section on beneficiary interests and protections often trips people up, me included, especially when you get into future interests. It feels like a different language, almost like guessing who gets what later down the line. What are the key things to understand about future interests within the context of a trust? Because it's not just about who gets the money now, but who gets it later and under what conditions.
You're right. Future interests can feel like a labyrinth of terms, but they're absolutely essential for understanding how property flows over time, especially in a trust where the settler is trying to control disposition far into the future. These are interests that become possessory at a later time, after some preceding interest expires or a specific condition is met.
Possessory later. Okay.
They're typically created when the settler of a trust wants to control how property is distributed beyond the immediate present beneficiaries.
So it's about setting up a precise chain of ownership, almost like a relay race for assets, or lining up future heirs. Who retains an interest and who gets a new one down the line.
Exactly. We categorize them based on who holds the interest. Either it's retained by the original creator, the grantor, or it's given to a new third party. First, interests that are retained by the grantor, the settler of the trust. These come back to the person who created the trust or their estate.
Okay. Interest going back to the start.
Right. The most common is a reversion. This is the grantor's right to possess the property at the natural end of a prior limited estate they created, like a life estate or a term of years. For example, if Eleanor's trust provides income to Sarah for life, then the principal reverts to Eleanor's estate. Eleanor or her estate has a reversion. It's the default if nothing else is specified.
Okay, reversion is the default return.
Then there's a possibility of reverter. This arises when the grantor conveys a fee simple determinable property that automatically ends upon a specified condition or event happening.
Fee simple determinable.
Exactly. Like Eleanor conveys land to a charity as long as it is used for educational purposes. If it stops being used for education, ownership automatically goes back to Eleanor or her estate. Poof.
Automatic return. Got it.
And third, the right of entry, sometimes called power of termination. Here, the grantor conveys a fee simple subject to conditions subsequent. This gives the grantor the ability to exercise the right of re-entry upon the happening of the condition. It's crucial to distinguish this from the automatic nature of a possibility of reverter.
So it's not automatic.
No. For example, Eleanor conveys land to a charity on the condition that it is always used for educational purposes, and if not, Eleanor can take it back. If it stops being a school, Eleanor has to choose to act to reclaim it. It doesn't automatically snap back. It requires an affirmative step from the grantor.
That distinction between automatic return and the choice to reclaim is really important. Okay. So what about interests that are given to someone new, a third party, not the original grantor?
Then we have interests that are given to a beneficiary, a third party, not retained by the grantor. First, the remainder.
Remainder. What's left over?
Kind of. It's an interest held by someone other than the grantor that becomes possessory upon the natural expiration of a prior interest, like a life estate. For example, in the Sterling family trust, income to Sarah for life, then the principal to Liam. Liam has a remainder interest. He simply waits for Sarah's life interest to naturally end.
He's next in line.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Remainders can be vested, meaning certain to take effect, or contingent, meaning subject to a condition or an unascertained person.
Okay. What else goes to a third party?
The executory interest. This is often the trickiest one.
Uh-oh.
Unlike a remainder, an executory interest is a future interest held by someone other than the grantor that either shifts from one grantee to another or springs out of the grantor at a later time, cutting short a prior interest.
Springing. Okay, shifting or springing?
Think of it as a jumper or an activator. It either divests, meaning it cuts short an earlier interest in a grantee, or it springs out of the grantor's estate to a new grantee upon a condition.
Could you give an example?
Sure, to Sarah, but if Sarah marries John, then to Ben. Ben has an executory interest because his interest cuts short Sarah's interest if she marries John. It doesn't wait for Sarah's interest to end naturally.
It cuts hers off.
Yeah.
I see. That helps clarify the distinction between what goes back to the creator and what goes forward to someone new. So an executory interest isn't just waiting in line like a remainder, it actually cuts in or jumps to a new party.
Exactly. It's an interest that becomes possessory by divesting or cutting short an earlier interest. It doesn't patiently wait for the natural expiration of a preceding estate like a remainder does. It acts as an interrupting force or a condition that shifts ownership.
That's a great way to think about it, an interrupter. Okay. What about class gifts? That sounds like it could get complicated if the group keeps changing, like Eleanor setting up a trust for her grandchildren when new ones might be born later.
It can, but there are established rules for clarity. A class gift is a gift to a group of individuals described by a collective label, like to my grandchildren or to the children of my daughter. The crucial concept here is that the class remains open and may admit new members.
So new grandkids can join the class.
Right, until one of two things happens. First, when at least one class member is entitled to obtain possession of the gift. This is often called the rule of convenience. Or second, when the preceding interest terminates.
When does it usually close then?
For example, if the gift is to my children for life, then to my grandchildren, the class of grandchildren remains open until the last child dies, because that's when the grandchildren would be entitled to take possession.
Makes sense.
Now, unless the governing instrument states otherwise, the general rule, the default rule, is that the gift is expressly limited to the transferor's surviving children or other class members.
Surviving. So if a child dies before the gift takes effect.
Their children, the grandkids in that line, generally do not take a share.
Wow. That seems harsh.
It can be, which is why many modern statutes have anti-lapse provisions that might change this outcome depending on the jurisdiction and specific language. So you always need to check for those specific anti-lapse rules. But the default common law rule is survivors take.
So if Eleanor's will just says, to my children, and one child dies before the gift takes effect, that child's kids don't get their parents' share unless the will specifically says so, or an anti-lapse statute applies. That's an incredibly important detail to know. And for anyone facing an exam on this, how should they approach questions about future interests, which often feel like the most intimidating part? Is there an analytical framework?
Absolutely, and this is crucial for essays and practical analysis. When analyzing future interest questions, you can guide yourself through these three questions, always in this order.
Okay, 3 steps.
1. Who is entitled to possession now? This establishes the current state of ownership and possession.
Okay, start with the present.
2. Who has a future interest? Identify all potential future interests that could become possessory later, applying the distinctions we just discussed: reversions, remainders, executory interests, possibilities of reverter, rights of entry.
Map out all the possibilities.
And 3. When, if ever, will the future interest vest? This question requires you to apply the rules of vesting, including determining if the interest is subject to any conditions precedent, and potentially applying the rule against perpetuities, though a deep dive into that rule is definitely for another session.
Right, let's not go down that rabbit hole today.
Agrees. But this systematic approach, who has it now, who might get it later, and when will they get it, ensures you don't miss any critical components of the problem and can accurately map out the flow of ownership.
So after all that meticulous planning and detailed structuring, trusts aren't set in stone forever, even if they feel like it sometimes. When and how can they actually change? Or perhaps end entirely? Because life happens, circumstances shift, and sometimes a trust needs to change with it.
Exactly. Trusts, despite their formal and often rigid nature, can be surprisingly dynamic and adaptable. Let's start with revocable trusts.
The ones the settler can change.
Right. Under the traditional common law rule, a trust was presumed to be irrevocable unless the document